The moment the truth finally came out, the room went silent. A grown woman sat across from investigators, her hands shaking as she spoke. Her voice was calm, but her eyes told a different story. She was not crying. She had cried enough years ago. What she was doing now was something much harder. She was telling them that the man who stole her childhood was not a stranger. He was not a masked monster hiding in the dark. He was someone her parents trusted, someone who had sat in their living room, someone who had been welcomed into their home. When she said his name, the officers looked at each other. They knew the case. Everyone did. It had been in newspapers, on television, talked about at dinner tables across America. But what she was saying now made it worse, much worse. Because this was not just an abduction. It was a betrayal. And it had happened not once, but twice. The arrest that followed would shock an entire nation. But the real question still hung in the air like a heavy cloud. How could a child be taken by someone they knew and returned only to be taken again? That answer begins years earlier in a quiet American town where nothing seemed wrong at all. Jan Broberg was just a regular girl. She lived in Idaho in the 1970s. Her life was simple: school, church, family dinners. She laughed easily and trusted people without thinking twice. Her parents were loving and protective, but like many families at the time, they believed their neighborhood was safe. Doors were not always locked. Neighbors were friends. Adults were trusted. One of those adults was a man named Robert Birchtold. Everyone called him B. He lived nearby. He was friendly. He helped the family with small things. He talked kindly to Jan and made her feel important. He never raised his voice, never looked dangerous. To her parents, he seemed helpful and polite. To Jan, he seemed like someone she could trust. That was his power. The first time it happened, Jan was only 12 years old. She was walking when he approached her. He spoke calmly. He said there was an emergency. He said her parents knew. He said she needed to come with him. His words were smooth and confident. And because she knew him, she did not run. She did not scream. She got into the car. That decision changed her life forever. He drove her across state lines. He told her lies the entire way. He said powerful people were watching her. He said her family would be hurt if she did not obey. He said she had a special role to play. To a child, it sounded terrifying and real. For weeks, Jan was held captive. When she was finally found and brought home, the town celebrated. Her parents held her tightly. Reporters called it a miracle. The family believed the nightmare was over. But the man who took her was not treated like a monster. He was questioned, he was confronted, but he was not truly punished. And worst of all, he was still allowed near the family. That is when the unthinkable happened. 7 months later, he came back. This time, he did not need tricks. He had already broken her trust. He had already filled her head with fear. He told her it was time to go again. And once more, she disappeared. This second abduction lasted longer, much longer. Jan was moved from place to place. She was isolated, controlled, confused. The man who had once seemed friendly now ruled her entire world. He decided when she ate, when she slept, when she spoke. He convinced her that escape would destroy her family. She was a child carrying a secret too heavy for any child to hold. When she finally returned home again years later, something had changed. On the outside, life moved on, but inside, the damage was deep. The truth was buried. The town wanted to forget. The family wanted peace, and Jan wanted to survive. So she stayed silent for years.
She grew up. She went to school. She tried to live a normal life.
But the memories never left. The fear never fully faded. The betrayal never healed. It would take decades before she felt safe enough to say everything. And when she did, it would expose not only a predator, but the mistakes that allowed him to take a child twice. As the investigators leaned closer, listening to her story, one thing became clear. This was not just about what happened to her. It was about how close evil can be. And in the next chapter, we will go back to the very first warning signs that everyone missed, and the moment that could have stopped everything, but didn't. It all started with small things that no one noticed at the time. Jan Broberg was a bright, cheerful 12-year-old girl. She loved to read, loved music, loved riding her bike around the quiet Idaho neighborhood she called home. She had a normal family, caring parents, and a younger brother who followed her everywhere. Life seemed ordinary, safe, but safety can be an illusion. Robert Birchtold, the man who would change her life forever, had always seemed trustworthy. He was polite, quiet, and knew the family well. He would drop by to help fix a leaky faucet or take Jan to church events. At first, nothing seemed wrong. He listened to her, praised her, and made her feel special. It was a subtle manipulation, one designed to earn her trust and the trust of her parents. The first warning signs were tiny. He asked odd questions about her family. He lingered a little too long when her parents were out of the room. Sometimes he suggested she go on small trips with him. Jan didn't understand why it felt uncomfortable, but she also didn't know she had the right to say no. At 12, a child trusts the adults around her. They are supposed to protect her, not scare her. The first abduction happened in the summer. Jan had been told that her parents were expecting a visit and that she needed to meet him somewhere to help with a surprise. He had mapped everything carefully. Every word he said was rehearsed. When he asked her to get into his car, there was no threat, no shouting, no visible weapon. There was only trust and betrayal. Once inside his car, the world shifted. He drove her to a remote location, telling her that no one could find her, that her parents would be in danger if she tried to escape. Weeks passed. During that time, he moved her from house to house. He isolated her from everyone she knew. He told her that she was special, that she had a purpose, and obedience was the only way to keep her family safe. Back at home, her family was frantic. Searches began. Neighbors spread out. Posters went up. The police were called, but no one could find her. And while the world thought this was just a single abduction, the darkness had only begun. After a few weeks, Jan was returned home. Everyone thought the nightmare was over. The media called it miraculous. Her parents were overjoyed, but the danger was far from gone. Birchtold had planted seeds of manipulation in her mind. He had earned her compliance, and he was not done. Months later, Birchtold returned. This time, he didn't need trickery. He already had control. He convinced Jan to leave again, using fear, trust, and subtle coercion. She was gone for a second time. This abduction was longer and more complex. He moved her across state lines, isolated her even further, and continued the psychological control that he had mastered during the first kidnapping. During the second abduction, Jan's life was a blur of fear, confusion, and survival. She was forced to obey, to hide, to accept that she couldn't tell anyone what was happening. She tried to escape once or twice, but the constant fear for her family kept her from running completely. The man who had seemed like a neighbor and friend had become her captor and her world. Meanwhile, the community moved on. Life outside the Broberg family continued as normal. Teachers continued teaching, neighbors waved hello, and Birchtold continued to operate in plain sight, exploiting every loophole that allowed him to approach Jan again.
The real horror is not just in the abduction itself, but in the fact that someone who was meant to be trusted could manipulate, control, and terrorize a child, not once, but twice. And it was only decades later that Jan would have the courage to speak up fully. Her revelations shocked investigators and historians alike. They painted a picture of systematic abuse and manipulation. The FBI and local police pieced together how he had moved her, how he had isolated her, and how he had evaded serious punishment for so long. But the story does not end with her speaking out, because even after decades of silence, the past can come back to haunt both the victim and the perpetrator. And the full truth, the evidence that finally led to his arrest and conviction, contains twists that will shock anyone who hears them. In the next chapter, we will see the investigation unfold, the evidence revealed, and the shocking moment when Jan finally confronts the man who took her childhood, not just once, but twice. And even then, the story will leave you wondering, how could such evil hide in plain sight for so long? The day Jan finally spoke out, the room felt colder than usual. Every word she said carried the weight of decades of fear, silence, and betrayal. She told investigators everything, every detail she had kept locked away since those terrifying years as a child. How she had been manipulated, controlled, and moved from place to place. How the man she had trusted had convinced her she couldn't escape without endangering her family. For decades, Robert Berchtold had hidden behind the facade of the friendly neighbor. He had smiled at parents, laughed with teachers, and gone unnoticed in the community. But Jan's testimony shattered that illusion. The police now had the full picture. They understood how a predator could exploit trust and how careful planning and manipulation allowed him to abduct a child, not just once, but twice. Evidence that had been scattered across years and locations was finally pieced together. Photographs, old letters, and witnesses who remembered small but unusual behaviors painted a damning portrait. Investigators realized how close they had been to stopping him the first time and how those small oversights had allowed him to strike again. Every detail was critical. The routes he drove, the places he hid Jan, the lies he had told her parents, and the subtle psychological control he had maintained over her. The courtroom was tense when Berchtold finally faced justice. Jan sat with her parents, watching the man who had stolen her childhood sit in the defendant's chair. The prosecutors laid out the facts clearly. A man who violated trust, exploited innocence, and caused years of trauma. The evidence was undeniable. When Berchtold spoke, his words were weak, defensive, almost pleading. But the damage was done. The truth could not be undone. Jan's story, her courage, and the painstaking reconstruction of events left no room for doubt. Outside the courtroom, the public was stunned. Many could not believe that someone so close to a family could commit such acts. Parents, teachers, neighbors, everyone asked the same question. How could this happen? How could a predator hide in plain sight? The case became a symbol of vigilance, a warning that trust, while essential, must always be paired with awareness. Jan's bravery did more than put her captor behind bars. It inspired nationwide conversations about child safety, the psychology of abduction, and the subtle ways predators manipulate trust. Programs were developed to teach children about safe boundaries, signs of manipulation, and how to seek help, even from someone they knew. But for Jan, the story was more personal. Speaking out, finally, was not just about justice, it was about reclaiming her life. It was about showing the world that a child who had been silenced for years could survive, could fight back, and could expose the truth no matter how terrifying it had been. Her journey was not easy. Memories of fear and betrayal lingered. Nightmares returned. Doubts crept in. But with every word she shared, every detail revealed, she took back a little more of the power the abductor had stolen. And in the end, justice was served, not only in law, but in the reclaiming of her story. The case of Jan Broberg stands as one of America's most shocking examples of abduction by someone known and trusted. It is a story that reminds us how careful we must be, how courage can overcome fear, and how the darkest events sometimes come from the places we least expect. Even today, people study the case to understand the psychology of manipulation, the warning signs of abduction, and the resilience of survivors. Jan Broberg's story is not just about tragedy, it is about survival, courage, and the power of speaking the truth. And though her childhood was stolen, her voice finally cannot be silenced.
Even after Robert Berchtold was behind bars, the story didn't end. The shockwaves of his crimes continued to ripple through the Broberg family, their community, and across the nation. People couldn't believe how a predator had been allowed to operate so openly, so casually, and yet so destructively. Jan had survived, but her story became a stark reminder that danger can hide behind a friendly smile. Years after her abductions, Jan began speaking publicly about what happened. She shared her experiences at schools, on documentaries, and in interviews, hoping to educate others. Her goal was simple. No child should ever feel powerless or trapped, and no parent should ever assume that trust alone is enough to protect their family.
As she recounted the past, it became clear how much courage it took to break the silence. Every detail she shared was a lesson in vigilance, trust, and awareness. She wanted people to understand the warning signs, the subtle manipulation, the small lies, and the quiet control that predators use to trap their victims. And she wanted survivors to know they are not alone and that speaking out is powerful. The Broberg case also led to larger conversations about law enforcement, child safety, and psychological manipulation. Experts studied the events, trying to learn how to prevent similar tragedies. Jan's story became a blueprint for educating families and children about the dangers of abduction, even by someone familiar. But beyond the lessons, the story left viewers with a sense of awe at Jan's resilience. Despite losing her childhood twice, she survived. She faced fear head-on, navigated a world of lies and control, and ultimately reclaimed her life. Her bravery showed that even in the darkest moments, hope and strength can endure. And now, as we reflect on this chilling true crime, remember that vigilance and awareness are the first line of defense. Protect your loved ones, teach children about boundaries, and never ignore the small warning signs. They matter more than you think. If you want to hear more shocking true crime stories, discover cases that unfold in ways you won't believe, and learn the lessons behind them, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Every story is real, every case is American, and every video is designed to keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't miss what's coming next, because in the world of true crime, the truth is always stranger and scarier than fiction.